How's it going, everyone? It's International Master Danny Rensch here, back on Chess.com's YouTube channel, and today on our openings to-do list, as you can see from the title, is the fried liver attack. And no, this is not a disgusting English meal. I'm just joking. Fried liver sounds delicious, but let's do it like this. The main point of the fried liver is that White is trying to take advantage of the weakest square on the board. Any beginner player who's had some basic training, or if you read some of the most important principles to understand when you first start to learn chess, is that f7 and correspondingly f2 are the weakest squares on the board because they are only protected by the king. One example that most beginners and let's say non-tournament players will try to use to take advantage of that are the four-move checkmates, which can start with the development of this bishop, followed by the development of the queen, and if black doesn't know what he's doing, he brings the knight to f6, and bam, white backdoor checkmates him. Another theme that has to do with the weakest square on the board. So this is not a lesson on the four-move checkmate or every possible option to take advantage of the weakest square on the board. We're just showing you that here as to make you aware of the theme, and one of the main things that makes the fried liver tick, which is that if it wasn't for the fact that this f7 square was so weak, this entire idea of White's king, bishop, and king's knight coming together to attack that square wouldn't be possible. So knight f3 is actually not a bad move, and it develops with a purpose to attack the pawn. And you see that many mainline openings, including the Spanish Ruy Lopez, the Scotch game, and the Italian game, which is what we see here with bishop c4, all start with this move to knight f3. Now here black has a couple options, and the main two are bishop to c5 and knight f6. Bishop to c5 is a move that would completely avoid the fried liver because it leaves the queen open to guarding this g5 square, taking away the possibility from the knight. However, bishop to c5 opens up other possibilities, including the Evans Gambit, as well as some of the sharpest variations of the Italian game, being ideas for d4, the Gioco Piano ideas, are not nearly as effective without the target of the bishop on c5. Aka these two breakthroughs. So bishop to c5 is perfectly playable, but so is knight f6, and so many people will play knight f6 to avoid the Evans Gambit and some of the sharper variations of the Gioco Piano, but in doing so, they allow this move knight to g5. So what you see here is the bishop and knight lining up to attack the weakest square on the board, just like the queen and the bishop do in the Scholars mate of the four-move checkmate. The difference is here, you're not threatening checkmate, but you are actually threatening to win a large amount of material. If this pawn falls either by check, you will lose your right to castle, and I will have won a pawn. And if it falls by the knight, I might follow that with winning an even further amount of large material. So not pretty, potentially, right? There are a lot of good reasons to play the fried liver if you're White, mainly the ones I just listed. The reward is very high. Even if the risk is high, the reward is very high. And so especially at beginner levels of chess and amateur levels before you get into organized tournament play, as I would call it, where people have a pretty good idea of how to handle this, I would recommend the fried liver as a step for a lot of beginner players looking to get a quick win. It's a very sharp attacking style to take against your friends and other people who may not be suspecting this type of very quick assault on the king side. So if you're tired of playing for the four-move checkmate at the very beginner levels, which probably doesn't work anymore once you've done it one time, they don't fall for it, the fried liver is a much more, I say, sound way to go for taking advantage of the weakest square of the board. Now I say sound with, my best Dr. Evil quotation fingers in the air, because it's all relative to the level that you're playing at, right? It's all relative to your own perspective, and it's not the most sound opening at the high levels of chess, because what does it do? It breaks a principle very early. It moves a piece twice before completing the development. One of the most important principles to becoming a strong tournament chess player is that you complete the development of all of your pieces, particularly your minor pieces and getting castled, before you think about anything. The only exception would be if your opponent gives you a large amount of material. Okay, obviously you might take it, but otherwise you don't break that principle and lose your focus in terms of completing your development. There can be dire consequences to that sort of thing. But before we show you some of the best ways for black to tackle the fried liver, aka the consequences, let me just give you an example line. Let's say that black makes a wasted move or doesn't know how to deal with this. If this pawn falls with check, as I said, this position is already incredibly devastating because the king has lost his right to castle and the knight is still threatening to come in. don't even forget the white's up a pawn. But also, simply taking with the knight immediately will also take away black's right to castle, because after the queen shields herself, we'll be taking the rook. So this is this is certainly not child's play. It's not even funny to consider that white is actually up a pawn and a rook in this position. And even if this knight got trapped and lost itself, white would still be up a serious amount of material. So just wanted to show you that the reward is there as far as justifying the risk. But what can black do against it? Well, there are two ways to play against the fried liver, two main ways. The most concrete way is this move d5, which pretty much takes care of the direct job of blocking the bishop's scope to this f7 square. And we're going to talk about that in a second, because it's the most concrete in the way I would recommend for players to play as black. But another very sharp way to play, and a very risky way to play, one that if you have time at home or if you have access to some software, meaning some databases of collected grandmaster games and other master games, you might look into this move bishop to c5. Theoretically, I believe it's supposed to be good for white, but I say that I believe because I know that there are so many different ideas that have been tried, and with the help of computer analysis and all kinds of sacrifices becoming possible, I honestly do not even know what the most current theory is in this position. But what I can say is that black's idea is to counteract white's loss of time of development with a sacrifice and an attack of his own. For example, if knight takes f7 is played, after bishop takes f2 check, before dealing with the fork, the king has to take care of his own problems. Well, taking this bishop would allow another check, and if the king makes any sort of unsuspecting move, we might get another tempo move, which comes and threatens checkmate. And if white doesn't know what to do next, you might see another piece joining the attack, and after this pawn pushes, another piece joins the attack. So this is one way for black to get lots of attacking chances. And the move king e2 walks immediately into this move knight d4 check, followed by similar stuff. So this idea of bishop c5 followed by taking on f2 is sort of a counter blow to white's idea of taking advantage of the f7 weak square. It's black's idea of taking advantage of white's f2 square and the lack of development as well that white has in his position. So again, bishop to c5 followed by taking f2. I can say that the most theoretically popular move for white for a long time was the move king f1, declining to take this bishop and therefore allow the floodgates to open in terms of all of black's pieces coming in. But this position is still very unclear. Even after the move queen e7, knight takes here, moves like d5, opening up the bishop to come, and even knight takes e4 immediately. Oh no, knight takes e4 immediately runs into this check. But the move d5, followed by more pieces joining the attack, still leaves this position really complex. So if you have some time and you want to counteract the fried liver with a really exciting idea and you're into those kinds of positions, then bishop to c5 is for you. But the most positionally sound way, and the way at the highest level people take advantage of this move knight to g5, is the most concrete way to do so, which is simply to stop the threat. By playing this move d5, black is actually cutting off the scope of the bishop, and so indirectly guarding the f7 pawn, making this pony feel a little bit silly, actually. And if a move like bishop takes d5 were played to immediately renew the threat, black would eliminate the bishop and then pick up this knight, and at the end of a long series of forced moves like this, black may find himself in a winning position after a few different moves. And black's attack is pretty overwhelming. So the tables have turned on white for his loss of time in the opening by making this bad move, bishop takes d5. So if this isn't an option, white has to take with the pawn. And in this case, black has one last trap to look out for before he's really sort of put a bucket of water on the fried liver fire. And that move is to not play knight takes d5. The move knight takes d5 opens up the door for the lolly attack, as it's called, which you might think you see the potential here. It's almost as if you wish your bishop could have x-ray vision for a moment and jump past the knight on d5 to renew the threat on f7. And if you find the right move here, it sort of does just that. This move knight takes f7, exclamaviach, king takes f7, queen f3, Chekaruski, followed by knight to c3. And obviously king e6 was sort of forced, as any other move loses the material back, and what black has lost the right to castle. So black must take his chances with the king in the center, but after the move knight to c3, Black's only move is knight to e7 to defend, and though this position with precise play is actually not just clearly lost for Black, in fact, I think the position is more or less unclear. Even though with absolute precise play, Black may be okay, White's attack is really strong, and in a practical sense, we favor White in these positions a lot, because after moves like castles, followed by d4, bringing the rooks to the open files once we complete development, we like White's chances to throw everything but the kitchen sink at the Black king, instead of liking Black's chances up a piece. You see that at a certain point, material itself may not be enough to justify the initiative that your opponent's pieces get, and that's something to remember. That's one of the things that makes chess hard, is the ability to weigh these sort of checks and balances and keep everything in check and not be too dogmatic about the evaluation of material versus the ability to actually create threats against a particular weakness. So that's one of the things that makes chess fun and tricky, and so that's why the fried liver is a lot of fun to play. A lot of people fall for this trap and allow knight takes f7, and the few people that maybe would know that Black could actually get away with that move and defend would never play it, because there's no reason to go into a completely unclear position where one false step lands their king checkmated in the middle of the board. They'd rather go to a position that is much more equal, and one false step might find them in a little bit worse position, but not one where their king is getting trapped and the game is over. So here, Black's next move is usually knight a5. Knight to d4 is another very tricky option here, and after White opens up the rediscovery of this bishop, we get a lot of really complex variations, but we're not going to go into that now. I'm just going to point it out as an option so that you guys know it's there. And the other move is knight to a5, which is the best move, immediately forcing the bishop off of this diagonal, and therefore putting a stop to the fried liver. If the bishop goes anywhere else, Black is going to pick up his pawn that he sacrificed. This bishop has lost time. This knight has lost time. Black can quickly develop, castle long, and everybody's in happy town. And so White needs to continue to make forcing moves to stop Black from picking up this pawn and this knight feeling silly. So he plays this move, bishop e5 check. Bishop e7 is not the best move after the move queen e2. You can look up the variations there to see why White's initiative is still pretty strong. The main point is based on the fact that if you take here, I can take with check, and I'm forking the queen and the king and knight, so it's not so simple. But the best move for Black is this move c6, and after takes, White has to retreat the bishop to one of these three squares, and in any one of them, Black's pawn sacrifice is fully justified with pretty natural moves, developing moves here, kicking this knight back to his square, kicking it again potentially in some cases where the knight may have to go back even further, so that's not fun. And in many cases, Black is developing and has a full initiative and a full set of tricks to compensate for the sacrifice of the pawn. So again, the line I recommend against the fried liver is the variation with d5, knight a5, and c6, which puts White in an awkward position because though he's up a pawn, as you saw, Black's initiative and extra development makes it very difficult for White to have a good middle game. The positions are complex at a high level, and I believe the best move theoretically these days is the move bishop to d3 to try to protect this square e4 so that the knight doesn't have to go back here and allow that kicking that you just saw of the pony. But even in variations like this, Black is still getting full compensation, and the positions are complex, a lot of fun to play. So White, in many cases, will regret this slight loss of time with the knight here. And the fried liver is an exciting opening. Hopefully you enjoyed this quick introduction as an idea to just sort of give you a general outline of the concepts behind both White and Black's approach. And we will see you around on Chess.com.